There it is.
That's incredible.
And you can see now the bottom of my poetry collection, the bottom shows. I think I covered more than every inch of the prayer rug, the yoga rug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Paul, I do have a question. If we were to get one thing out of this event, what's the most important thing for you that you want people to take away?
I think that, doing the fest allows people to have the experience of putting writing poetry at the top of one's priority list. And the fact that it's happening in August makes it easier because August is a month where, a lot of people are on vacations. And the United States is a very Calvinist country, and they want you to work until you die, basically. So I like the idea that August is kind of like a unofficial vacation month, and so to put poetry at the top of that allows people to have the experience of prioritizing poetry in their life, the composing of it, the reading of it, the exchange of it, and more importantly, living life as a way to incubate poems. Having the life and mind of a writer 24/7 during the fest, during August. And when I say August regarding the fest, what I mean is not necessarily the calendar month of August, but the time someone gets their list till August 31st. So that's part of why we called the anthology 56 Days of August. Because it used to be you signed up on the 4th of July, you got your list on the 5th, and on the 6th you started, and that gave you 56 days to write the 31 poems. So that kind of stuck, 56 Days of August, and it's a nice way of expanding that 1 month a year where it's sort of okay as an American to not be so focused on work. So we say we only want 1 month, but the proviso is that month that's 56 days.
Welcome you all to, and especially to welcome all the first year people. I'm so excited. This is my first year too. I've been sending postcards and poems on postcards for many years. And I'll just show you, I actually have a small press with some friends, and we publish works on postcards. This is a short story, and we're planning to do some poems. I'm working on a series right now with a poet to do poems on postcards. So hooray for poetry on postcards. And in that vein, Maya had suggested that we do what's called a chat waterfall. So this will also help you if you haven't. I think everybody managed to use the chat. Abaya, did you manage to use the chat? Okay, so if you're on a computer, right? Can you unmute Abaya, please, Maya? So if you're on a computer, down at the bottom, there is a button that says chat, and it has a little speech bubble. If you are on a tablet.
Yeah.
Did you find it?
No.
So you're on a computer?
Oh, there it is. It says
Yay.
participant.
Next to participants, to the right of that is a chat.
Yeah, so if you just click on that button, you will find a place where people have typed things in. And what we're going to do for the chat waterfall is don't hit send yet. So we'll all type the same thing in, and then everybody, when I say to do it, will push the enter or send button, and then the chat will just have everybody saying the same thing all at the same time. It's an alternative to everybody talking at the same time, which is a little more difficult on Zoom. So, welcome, Jennifer. Glad you could make it. Hi. If you can just type in the chat where you are postcarding from and what year this is for you of the Poetry Postcard Fest. And then after that, so I would love it if everybody, so Jennifer's from Cupertino, California, and it's her very first year. Welcome. There's so many people who it's their first year on this call, so you're in good company. If you could type in hello, fellow postcard poets in the chat. So I'm gonna put that in there, and you could always copy and paste it if you wanted to. So, but don't hit send yet, and we're gonna all do it at the same time, and it's just gonna go woo. So we have everyone muted right now because there's kind of a lot of us. But later on, when we are in the question and answer part, I'll ask people to type their questions into the chat, and then Maya will unmute you so that you can ask your question of Paul. So people, I think, are still typing a little bit. Anybody need more time to type hello, fellow postcard poets into the chat? Just go like this if you need more time. Okay, thank you, Jerry and Maggie, for waiting. Okay, ready? So when I say go, then everybody push enter so that it will suddenly have the waterfall in the chat. Ready, go. Woohoo! Yay, that was fun. Thank you so much. All right, well, now we're officially starting. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you to kick off the Poetry Postcard Fest and to ask some questions of Paul Nelson so that you can get the most out of the fest. So Paul, I'm just gonna, there we go. I'd just like to start off, if you could just summarize very shortly what the fest is, just in case people have signed up for something and not quite sure what they've signed up for.
The Poetry Postcard Fest is an exchange of postcards, of poems composed on postcards, sending postcards to strangers for 15 years. You sign up, you get a list of 32 poets. One of those names is yourself, and you have to the end of August to send 31 original poems on postcards to the people on your list. And going to the mailbox is the most joyous time of year because in addition to those Costco flyers and other crap that you don't get in Seattle now, a lot of election junk, you get poems. And it's such a beautiful thing. I've already been getting poems, and even from someone here in the chat. So it's a really beautiful thing. This one especially from Colette Dutton. Look at that. I just love that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Anyway, that's what it is.
Wow. Thank you, Paul. So I have a question that I think will help people who are just starting out. Where do you get the cards?
Well, there's a lot of places to get the cards. As you see by Colette Dutton, this is pretty serious stuff. It's kind of thick. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. She obviously makes her own cards, and she's got sort of a postcard factory, what she does. So she creates a whole bunch of them based on some real serious card stock here. I think it goes beyond card stock, but you don't need to do that. I've gotten postcards on index cards. People just buy a bunch of index cards and there's nothing special about it. And sometimes they decorate it, sometimes they do little drawings, put a poem on the back, address, stamp, and there you go. It goes from that basic thing to maybe a step above that would be going to, I would say, we don't really call them drugstores anymore, but I was in the Pike Place Market and those cheap tourist postcards with pictures of a space needle and stuff like that. I've trained myself not to buy those anymore because as soon as I see postcards, I'm like, oh, I want them. And I collected stuff, postcards. I've got about 400, and then I started making my own. So they're sitting there, including antique postcards. You could buy postcards at the antique shop. You could white them out and create erasure poems. You can white them out and write your own poem on that. You can cannibalize that and make your own collages from that. And there's other people who take cereal boxes. I think it was an Eggo waffle box I got that had Eggo waffle on one side and the poem on the back. Of course, that was a little larger, so we had to put extra postage on. Always put the appropriate amount of postage. If you don't know, bring it to the post office and they will surely tell you. So a lot of different ways that one can get their own cards. You don't have to make them, but there's a quality of the fest which is really interesting. When you get a bunch of cards each fest, each August, you think, oh, wow, I can do that. So you try and steal a little bit of fire from people like Abaya Thomas. You can't make them as beautiful as her, but maybe you can make them closer to that. Or Stanley Del Gozo, who always has a spiritual theme and does sort of a Buddhist thing. You can take a page out of his book, or many other techniques, not just in the poems, but in the creation of the cards. So as many techniques, I think, as there are people.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that really attracted to me to the fest is the opportunity to see other people's art and to get ideas from it, both in the poems and in the postcards. We have a question in the chat that is being answered in the chat. So that's great. And I just wanted to let you know there are 6 inches by 4¼ inches is the maximum size for a postcard stamp. But if you want to send a bigger one, you can just put a letter stamp on there and it will go. There is a limit to that too, but the USPS.com, you can find out everything you ever wanted to know about sizes of mail pieces.
Well, the stamps are another aspect of the art. I mean, people start out, imagine starting out with a basic, let's say you buy your cards, you buy a book of cards at an art gallery, like you leave the Art Institute of Chicago, exit through the gift shop, and you've got a bunch of, Salvador Dali postcards or whatever. And then you get the postcard stamps and you do that. Well, there are people who collect stamps. I mean, look at the stamps we've had in the last few years. Jimi Hendrix, John Lennon, Harlem Renaissance, Ruth Asawa. There's some incredibly beautiful stamps, and you realize, once you go through those stamps, they're gone. So hang on to them. I got some David Bowie stamps from the UK from my friend, and I put them away. So do not use those. Hang on to those. So, and there are people who are stamp collectors who will put 3 or 4 stamps on something. I'm not afraid to use a letter stamp to send out postcards, and sometimes there's a connection to the content. I mean, I think I had something about frogs, and I said, I have a frog stamp somewhere. And I also had a poem about that involved a duck the other day, and I'm like, I'm sure I have a duck stamp somewhere. And sure enough, I went into my stamp stash, which is right down here, and I got a duck stamp out, and stamps. Here's my stamp file, my stamp folder, and I can show you the one the duck came on from Heritage Breeds.
Oh, that's beautiful.
There's the duck right there. So I'm saving the ass for someone special. That one. So, but yeah, lots of beautiful stamps. I mentioned the Ruth Asawa stamps. Oh, here's one that you just had, and you can only get these by mail. They won't sell it at the USPS. You have to get it by mail. But Japanese American soldiers of World War II,
Oh, wow.
soldiers who their families were being interned here in the United States, and yet they were proving their citizenship by going and fighting the Nazis during World War II. So that's an incredible stamp. And
I'll have to get some of those. My family was an intern.
And then, of course, this year is the year of the metal ox. So this is the Lunar New Year's. And being a metal ox myself, it's kind of like, personal myth right there on the stamp.
Thank you, Paul. I also wanted to show Lorraine, who's on this call, sent me these little stickers that are made from vintage stamps. So you could also just stick one of those next to your real stamp, and I think it'll still go through.
I did that with stamps from Iceland one year because I went to Iceland. Stamps from Canada, there were hockey player stamps, and stamps from Mexico when I was down there during the fest in 2014. I also found this the other day around somewhere, and I'm going to stick that on somebody's card. Somebody's going to get some weird collector type stamps that I've been hanging on to for a while.
It's really exciting, the uh, just variety of things you can do. So I also wanted to ask you, we had talked before about tips for the physical cards, like how to not necessarily to make them, but how to make sure that they're good for the post office.
Mhm. One very important thing is to leave some space on the bottom of the card, because you'll often find that little strip. I mean, look at Stanley's came through here, and you could see that they covered up a bit of his text, so it made it a little harder for me to read the bottom of that. I think I got it. There's some writing on the bottom here, but that didn't interfere. They have different techniques for canceling the card. So sometimes they do that. And sometimes there's that little strip which you can peel off and you can see things. Sometimes there's hardly anything at all. Like this one, there's nothing at the bottom of it. But it's I think good practice, especially on the left side, the side where the poem goes, to leave about, I don't know, half an inch or so, and just have that. Sometimes I do that and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I get carried away. I remember Nashira Priester, bless her soul, she passed away in this last year. She had every little nook and cranny of that card covered with a word. And it was fun to read because you had to kind of turn it as it was going. But it's best practice to write the address, put the stamp on. Once you put the stamp on, it's like now you're committed to doing it. And then leaving space at the bottom, I think. Yeah, that's what I would suggest for that.
Thank you. So I know that the Poetry Postcard Fest is designed to help people become more spontaneous with their writing. But what would you say to someone who's planning to write their poem first, like in their journal or a separate piece of paper, and then transfer it onto the postcard once they've got something they like?
Well, I think that's typical of how people start out. It's the editor is the editor's mind. And I think the editor can be your friend in many situations. In this situation, we try to give people freedom from their editor's mind. And that is, imagine that you're sending a postcard to one person. And when they get it, they're going to go, hey, a postcard. They're going to be happy just seeing that pop up in the mail instead of a bill or a summons to appear in court or the latest Costco specials or vote for me for mayor of Seattle because you don't like the way things are going right now. So of course I would be better than that. And then you file through all that crap, you throw it usually away or in the recycle bin, and then you get a postcard, right? It's a joyous thing just to get it. And it doesn't matter if it's Shakespeare or Emily Dickinson or whomever. It's a postcard. It's you wrote that to this person. You took your time to sit down to think about sharing something from your life, addressing it, putting a stamp on it, sending it to the mail. I also send it to the mail with a little prayer, right? I think that they're going to appreciate that regardless. So don't worry about trying to write the world's best 31 poems in a month. It can't be done. The beauty of writing 31 is you're going to have 4 or 5 at the end of it that are going to be keepers, right? They're not all going to be keepers, but I had a friend who played golf and he said, it's funny, the more I practice, the luckier I get on the golf course, right? And that's the same with anything. He just happened to be a golfer, but it would be the same with ping pong or sewing or cooking or anything else, right? Cooking. How many of us had to eat our cooking mistakes, right? Make it so it's, so it's not so bad that you have to throw it out. If that's the case, you're not paying attention. You put a little too much garlic. I remember my daughter, she thought a clove of garlic was the whole ball of it. So instead of a clove, it was a whole, and so she's eating it and she's going, I think this is too much. She didn't know a clove was one of those little things. So lesson learned. Will she ever give 400 times more of the garlic than she needs? No, she will never make that mistake again. So, be kind to yourself. If you do the fest as it's recommended, at the end of the 31 poems, you will have achieved something. There's an article called by David Sherwin, and he talks about how he cheated the first year. He cooked them on his in his notebook, and then he put them on the cards. And he was missing the whole idea. The purpose is to not write 31 Shakespeare quality poems. The purpose is to train yourself to trust that impulse. Now, that said, there's not going to be someone coming to your house and saying, I want to look at your notebook. I want to see what you've done. It's the popo tell me, the popo in this case being the postcard police, they tell me you haven't done it right. I mean, there's not that, but I think you're just cheating yourself if you cook it. I would recommend highly that David Sherwin article on how sending poems to strangers made me a better designer, I think is the name of it.
Maya,
And
can you
it's not,
search that up and put it in the chat, please?
yeah. I can probably find it just as quickly. I think it's on the front page of the
Yeah,
book.
I've read that. It's a very good article.
Yeah, and he's a great guy. He's a brilliant writer and he's a brilliant designer. So yeah, it says Sherman, but it's Sherwin. So
So you recommend that people really just go for it and compose the poem directly on the card in order to get the full experience of the fest?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's part of what it is. I mean, that's the way you do postcards. If you're sending a postcard to a friend, I love using that Jimmy Buffett line. If there's any parrot heads in the audience, the weather is here. I wish you were beautiful, right? I mean, because most people are saying the weather's beautiful. I wish you were here. So he twisted that around. And that's a literary technique, to take a cliche and twist it around or bust it. And that's why it's so surprise mind. There's that quality that Ginsberg talked about, having that surprise mind, which is hard for me to get to, having that surprise mind. But Jimmy Buffett did it, put it to a beautiful, memorable melody, and there you have it. But it's basically that. We want to know about your life. We want to know what's happening with you. How are you doing? How did you get through COVID? How much weight did you gain? One of our workshop participants, as a gift, really sweet woman, Ingrid Bruck, sent us 6 or 7 jars of the jam that she had made. And so I made some kind of joke in a poem about here we are in COVID, and we're just trying to lose weight, and yet slathering on Ingrid's black jewel raspberry jam. So that made a poem, and then I sent her the poem. I sent the poem to somebody else, but I sent her a copy of my PDF with an email saying, "I'm sorry, but you're going to be famous now that I've written about you in a poem." I could
So
probably
that actually reminds me of something that I wanted you to talk about, was whether you save an image of the poem that you send.
Yeah, well, after 15 years, I've got a fairly sophisticated approach to dealing with the Postcard Fest, and I love the fact that I'm getting 31. Actually, I sent out more than 31. I think I'm going to send out about 40 this year. I wish I could send more, but there's a lot to it. So I'm going to send about 40 this year. And so, yes, I scanned them. Now I've got one of those $100 printers. Everybody knows Hewlett Packard's business model is to sell you the printer real cheap and then get you for the ink. That's just the way it goes. But if you're scanning, no ink involved until you print it. And that's what I do. I scan it. I got to remind myself to not fill to the edge of the card, because if you scan it, put it right in the corner, then sometimes it cuts it off a little bit. But I do scan them, and then I do transcribe them, because one of the final frontiers for me is the calligraphy aspect of it. And my handwriting is okay. It's not great. If I use capital letters and really concentrate, then it's pretty good. I usually concentrate on writing the address part. I'm very good about that. Make sure that people's names are very clear, because that's the most beautiful thing to another person, either hearing their name or seeing it. So having the handwriting, I think, is really critical. But so I transcribe it just to be on the safe side, and I often will read my poems in public later after the fest is over. Sort of like, what did you do during your summer vacation? Well, here it is. I wrote 31 poems, and I wrote this to Ingrid or to so and so about Ingrid Bruck's Black Jewel Raspberry Jam. I'm gonna try and find that poem, by the way.
Yeah, that would be great. So I think sometimes people might want to keep copies of it just for historical records, or if you wanted to use them as a first draft or something like that, and work on it more, you could also do that.
Yeah, I think that's, well, a lot of people will call it is their starter poems. I've got 31 starters, and so they can do that. There's also a technique that I've been teaching called grafting, where you can take a line that you started with and then go a different way and create a different poem with it. Here's the Black Jewel Bliss. I'll share screen on it with it. See, it's highlighted. This went to Catherine Paul of Albuquerque. Catherine, Diane DePrima quoting Yevtushenko, I dreamed of a world without the sick and the fat. And then Ingrid's Black Jewel Raspberry Jam. It's blackberry. No, it's raspberry. That's right. And then Ingrid's Black Jewel Raspberry Jam vintage COVID lockdown arrived in me and the Rabbit Queen. We slathered it on. I mean, slathered, as if my 208 plus depended on it. And it don't, but it's part of our August bliss. And so for the picture, the image side of the postcard, it was a picture of our breakfast table with the Black Jewel Raspberry Jam, July 12, 2020, and a little sticker on the right. You can see how we slathered it on with a little butter knife. There's a sticker of a rose, a sticker of a napping Japanese woman that I got at Uwajimaya, and how many cards I've done so far. Oh, by the way, that was my 999th postcard, Black Jewel Bliss. And I went to Catherine Paul of Albuquerque, New Mexico. I hope she has it before she sees this video, because otherwise I've spilled the beans, so I apologize. Anyway, she has the card that's going to make Ingrid Bruck famous, though, so that's important.
So that brings up another question. Do you have to do one per day every day in August? Or can you, I know you've talked about the 56 days of August. That's probably not right.
56 Days of August,
right,
yeah. That was the title of the anthology we put out a couple of years ago. I have some copies of this. If people would like an inscribed copy, I'd be happy to send them when we have several copies here left at the house. I love getting the list on the 4th of July and having as much time as possible. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and for anyone who has kids, a 9-year-old daughter, I mean, if she's here in the house, unless I'm doing postcards at 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, I'm not going to get this kind of thinking done, the kind of solitude done that I need to create postcards. So fortunately, her mom took her on a road trip to Chicago and back from Seattle, and we had about 25 days without her. So we missed her. That was the bad news. The good news is I was able to get a lot of postcards done. And so I do it as often as possible. And often when I sit down to get my whole postcard factory going, I usually write at least 2, sometimes 3, at the most 4. You kind of get into a headspace, a consciousness where the words are starting to come to, well, at least you think they are. I mean, you don't really know, I think, till a year later when you look in your journal and think, hey, that's a keeper. I like that. Oh, I should put that on canvas. And that one, maybe not so much. So yeah, I would recommend when you sit down to write, maybe write a couple. I'm using Diane DePrima and Michael McClure quotes this year as sort of prompts. I'm using quotes from them as epigraphs. In that case, I had Diane DePrima quoting Yevtushenko, so there was a couple of different poets mentioned. But that also gives me more language to work with when I'm getting into the poem.
So people can basically make it their own. If they like to do one per day at 6 o'clock in the morning every single day, just do that. Or you can sit down and do multiples at the time.
There's no rules. You know, we ask the people if they sign up to send 31 poems and to have them in the mailbox before the end of August. Those are the 2 things that we ask that they do. There was a postcard poet who didn't sign up this year because she just got out the cards from 2020, like about a week ago. So she got her cards out there. They were a year late, but she did it. And you know, we didn't drive down there and knock on her door and say, we're going to have to talk to you, or you're barred from you have a probation of 3 years. No, we didn't do that. But you know, it's an honors thing. And really the fest is for poets themselves. The fest is for people to learn how to put their editor mind at bay and trust that initial impulse. And I think that once you begin to do that in writing and in language, you learn that you can trust that impulse in other aspects of your life. That's the main reason why we called uh, our workshop series um, Poetics as Cosmology. Because the same way you make a life, the same way the world is created, is the same way you make a postcard. You go on your nerve. You don't worry about fixing it in the mix. You give it your best shot in the moment. You tune yourself to the needs of the moment and the needs of the language. And you're tapping into forces larger than yourself that you begin to trust more than your ego. It's hard for all of us because we're human beings. But I mean, that's the key. And the workshops were, to me, they were thrilling to be able to facilitate and give people who've had a taste of spontaneous composition the next few steps and a bit of the theory behind that and other prompts and other tricks that they can do to get into that state where you feel that you're tied in with language, that you're in the zone, right? It happens to athletes. How do you get in the zone? You practice every day. I mean, I journal every day. I'm an advocate of the artist's way. I recommend that with my whole being, to write every day. So when you journal every day, then it's a little easier to get into postcard mode because your head's already in that kind of language typing or language writing kind of mode. So it makes it easier, I guess, when you do that. So for me to write a poem every day, I mean, I also write an American sentence every day. I write a 17-syllable poem every day and keep it in my pocket journal. Quite often, that will be some of the inspiration for the poem because there will be something, potent that happens. I'll get it down in 17 syllables, and it'll still stay in my head. So I can use it. It's part of my medicine bag, my poetry medicine bag, you might say.
Wow, thank you, Paul. That I love what you said about being in the moment and serving the needs of the moment under the language. So now I would like to open up for questions. And Maya, are you keeping track of those?
So far, the questions that have been asked have all been addressed in the chat, so we're good there.
Dinosaur saliva happening.
Yeah, a lot of going on, which is awesome. Thank you, everybody who's chiming in to both ask questions and answer them. We really appreciate it. But yeah, now is the time to open up. If you have questions for Paul, type them in. We want to keep this conversation going for a while.
I do see Michelle Hess has asked a question. Can you, in the chat that doesn't look like it was addressed? Maya, would you unmute Michelle, please? There we go.
Yeah, Michelle,
hi.
we're open.
Hi there. Yeah. Thank you. I have a bunch of postcards that have just been, stored up, but I wouldn't necessarily want to. A lot of them are from Arizona, but I'm not looking from travels at each postcard to necessarily have to be inspired by what's on it. Is okay to just use a postcard, use something and just write, or are people expecting that they'll match?
No, it took me about 13 years before I had some kind of matching. It was like, you get some weird collage and then you get some weird poem and it's like, I don't know about this guy. I like that he runs so fast, but his work is weird. And then what I started doing was having the idea of generally what I was going to write about and writing the poem and then creating the image. And to me, that was the way of getting some kind of simpatico. In fact, what I'll do now sometimes is even put hunks of poems on the outside, like a Diana Prima poem, a hunk of that. And sometimes there's an image that's related. Like, I'll give you an example. If I can pull up the screen here, share the screen, and bring up one of this year's poems. I'm gonna put that one down here. Just give me a minute to. Okay, so mussel fry, for instance. I'm gonna show you. Let me just share screen real quick. And forgive me to the people who got these poems, but So this went to Judy Kleinberg. Forgive me, Judy. Judy, one of the co-editors, along with Ina Roy Faderman of 56 Days of August, Mussel Fry, 9 July 2021. For those of you who don't know, the Pacific Northwest had a heat dome above it and had 108-degree high, the highest ever in Seattle, 3 days over 100. It had never been over 100 for 2 days in a row before this summer. So I say Judy Kleinberg, Bellingham, Washington, Judy, Tuxwoquib Watershed, Casa del Colibri, which is the House of Hummingbird, where we live, here in Cascadia, our bioregion. At what temp do mussels fry in their beds aside the Salish Sea? 108 degrees F, apparently. The Cascadian Anthropocene, taking a billion sea creatures, took a billion years to evolve. 4,000 miles of linear shore, now a graveyard. Let the world not burn. That was the poem. And then for the image, I took this Michael McClure poem and I took an image, and you see the credit there is marine ecologist Alyssa Gehman, Gehman from Vancouver, BC. And it's a bed of the mussel shells that had been opened, that were frying basically in the sea there. And what I did was I took Michael McClure's words and I superimposed them in white font over the image, and then just printed that off on my printer here. Big memories of pleasure and wrap a mind as substantial as a drift of snowflakes onto a warm hood, and less intelligent than the thin black spider in the morning sink. So I put it in a text box, I put it in white font, I superimposed it over the image, I printed the image, then I went to my sticker file. There's my Japanese woman again. She's showing up on, see with a broom there in the right-hand corner. I get that at Uwajimaya. And little starfish, clams and stuff like that, fish here at the bottom. And then I have this star sticker. It's like it's a marker. So I thought that the McClure quote was indicative of the intelligence in all sentient beings, and the fact that all these sentient creatures were allowed to fry like this because of our, historic moment. I mean, the biosphere is under incredible duress because of human-made conditions, because of fossil fuels. So somebody has to wake up, and of course, that's the last kind of rhetorical thing. Let the world not burn. It's sort of my prayer going to Judy, who is a longtime postcarder, Mussel Fry. So that's an example of, that's really detailed, and it took me 15 years to figure out how to do a lot of that. So I do also want to say that I co-founded the fest with Lana Hechtman Ayers, who's done the fest for many, many years. And so she deserves at least 50% of the credit, because she's responsible for helping us figure out how to get across what we were asking people to do 15 years ago. And all she said was, I said, I want to do something with postcards this August. And she said, I'll help. Two of the most beautiful words in the English language, I'll help. We all love to hear that.
Well, we thank her and honor her.
Yes, absolutely.
So I have a question from Cheryl. Maya, can you unmute Cheryl, please?
She's still muted.
Hi
There we
there.
go.
So the question is, how much information do we put about ourselves on there? Because I imagine that people already know if they can look us cross-reference on the list, but just put first name, last name. You put your address. Do you put a website? What do people do to identify?
Again, it's a great question. People do pretty much whatever they want to do. Some people don't sign it, and it's like you're looking at your list of 31 going, who the hell is that? Look at the postmark. It's from Houston, Texas. It must be this person. I don't know. I made the mistake of printing 300 or so postcards with my URL, but on glossy cardstock, and it's harder than hell to write. But then I put my URL there in the middle, paulinelson.com. Is it upside down? It might be upside down. There it is. I don't know. Paul E. Nelson, maybe it needs to go like that. PaulENelson.com is so right there. You know, it's funny. Somebody went on the Facebook page and said, this is an unsigned postcard. I don't know who the hell sent it. And then I think she put the image of it, and some people said, I think that's Paul Nelson. And then she's like, duh, it's URL right in the middle of it. And, you know, now what I do is I initial them. I put PN. So they can look at their list and see who PN might be. And this year, for some reason, I've been putting Hispanic or, you know, Spanish language, exclamation point upside down before PN and then exclamation point after. So I don't know why I started doing that, but once I did, I kept going, and that's how I do it. You don't have to put your address down, because if you're sending someone on your list, they have your address. Having your name, I think, is a nice touch. I always address it to a person. I usually put an exclamation point for them too, like you saw in that poem that I had, Muscle Fried Judy, which is a habit of mine. So I think putting at least your initials, if you want to put your name, that's good. Sometimes you get carried away and you start running out of room, and then you fill that little half-inch space on the bottom of the card, which should be left blank. So yeah, good question though.
I got a postcard already and it only had the person's first name, but I know a few other people with that same first name. So for a while I was thinking, oh, who sent this to me? Is it someone that I know, you know, who has this name? Or is it one of the people from is it the person on my postcard list? So in the end, I think it was somebody from the postcard list.
In the end, it's nice to get that group photo. I'm gonna share this. Let me see, share screen, and then the cards I got last year, and this is covering my my yoga rug right there on the floor. And you have to get back so far out, because I get so many people are so kind to send me a card, and yeah, it's just a beautiful thing. One year, I had an idea, and we were traveling in Oregon, and I had all my cards on me, and I got naked on a hotel bed on the coast in Oregon, and I had Bhakti cover almost my whole body in postcards, except I had a hat on, and other postcards were covering me. I mean, you could tell that I was naked underneath, and that's I don't know where that photo is. The photo's around somewhere. It can be found, but I was a lot skinnier then, and I think it freaked a few people out, to be honest with you. So I don't do that anymore. But if anyone wants to do that, you go right ahead and do it.
I like that idea of taking a photo of all the postcards that you got. Let's see.
Let me answer Michelle again, since she's got that. I write out my cards and then I go back and transcribe them. So I write them all in hand, and then I go back. When I use some other people's, like McClure's typography, his lineation is very specific. So sometimes I'll just print out what I have for McClure in terms of an epigraph, and I'll glue it to the card. And in the case of the McClure on that poem, I had it typed up, and then I put it in a text box, and I made it white fonts so it would stand out against the darkness of those muscle beds. But I always write out my poems by hand. And then when I transcribe them, I try and be consistent with the lineation, because sometimes there's a drift, or sometimes there's more than one space between words. And so I try and recreate that as best I can.
You don't take a second draft when you're typing them up?
Once or twice I've had to fix typos. So I'll fix a typo when the final versions for me and potentially for publication. I've had a few of them published. One of them, at least one was published in the Journal of Black Mountain College Studies, because spontaneous composition is very much a Black Mountain poetry thing. Charles Olson, Denise Levertov, folks like that. And we should probably put the link to the essay that I co-wrote with postcarder Margaret Lee, who's a brilliant scholar. And Margaret touches on something that's not my expertise, but I somehow knew the whole time. The medium is the message. So that's a Marshall McLuhan thing. And you're actually getting tangible things that you can touch and that you can actually smell. And it took me 15 years, but this year I've been putting rose water from Tenzing Momo, rainwater. I think it's a scent called Rain from Tenzing Momo, the herbal apothecary. And I've been painting it on the cards. And Bhakti will complain that I've been painting it on too thick because people are going to have to hold the cards like this. They're like little stink bombs coming in the mail. But I've been adding scent to them. And you can't do that. I guess you could in the New Yorker or something like that, but they don't, and maybe that's a good thing. But I've been actually scenting my cards this year, and it's like I didn't invent that. They've been doing that for 200 years, putting perfume on letters or whatever. And the cool thing about it is that the rain scent actually gives this sort of pink type hue, which is really beautiful. And then if you use watercolor postcards, they really soak it in. So you can really get some serious stank on some of those cards. So I don't think they're stinky scents. And I've yet to run out of rain. I've got magnolia, all the scents I got that Bhakti doesn't like to put in her infuser. I have down in my my stamp drawer down here, right down here.
Wow, another aspect. Lorraine has a question. Maya,
So,
can you?
Paul, I was just curious, what are some of the guidelines on sharing other people's postcards, the one we receive, front and or back? Obviously, we want to be careful with their address and so forth, but sharing within the Poetry Postcard Facebook page and then outside of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you can't share anyone's poem without their permission. People know that they're sending it to you and they're sending it to one person. So if they don't want it out there, it's their right to not have it out there and be part of your personal correspondence. And then when you sell all your ephemera to Stanford for $3 million, then they can see the postcard that Maya Carlisle sent to them in 2021. And they can say, look, we knew back then, we knew there was something special about Maya, and Lorraine got a card from her in the mail. How beautiful that was. The front of the cards, that's a different story. We have, people have posted the front of the cards, and the front is kind of fair game. It's a good bet to ask the person if you can do that. We asked Abaya and Colette and some of our other, Timotir and some of our other, brilliant postcard makers if we could use their work for an online Poetry Postcard Fest exhibit. So that's fair. If you're sharing within your groups, you've got a poetry group that meets on Zoom and you're not putting it online, I think that's fair enough. But the rules say do not share a poem without somebody's permission. And I think that's a good thing. We're telling people it's going to one person, and it should go to one person and for their enjoyment. So that notion of postcards being tangible, being these little things that we can hold in our hands, that the medium is the message, it's so different from the instant, tweet it and it goes around the world, or post it on Facebook or whatever, and it goes around the world. The revolution will not be on Slack is the first line of this poem that I got from Douglas. And there's something important about that. This is old school in many ways, but the medium is the message, and it's something tangible we can hold in our hands, but it's also something kind of personal. So the more that we can honor, don't share the cards without someone's permission, the more people will feel liberated to trust you and to trust their own deepest impulse, because it's medicine for other people when we reach as far down our throats as possible to share something that something important that's happened to us, something about our personal mythology, something about someone who's died. I was going through prostate cancer treatment.
But let me just interrupt you, Paul, because I wanted to be clear. Right now we're talking about not sharing the postcards that people have sent to you. So you're not publishing other people's poems,
right,
unless you ask them and they say yes.
That's correct. That's
and then
right.
So that is clear. Don't publish other people's poems unless you ask them and they say yes. But now the other question is, what about your own poems? Can you share those, and when can you share them, the ones that you wrote yourself?
I think yes, you can share them. You own those. Those are your creations. You own those and you have the rights to those. If you send it to someone, it doesn't matter. They have the right to keep it in their house and keep it in their file or put it on their wall or put it on their altar or stick it on their fridge with a magnet. But no, those are your poems. You created those and you are the creator. So you have authority over that. I would wait 30 days. I would wait till the end of the fest. I think the best thing to do is to wait till September 1st to write an afterword about how the fest was for you, what themes came up for you, what it was like, what you struggled with, what you focused on, what you were obsessed with, and sign up for the next year because the fest opens up registration on September 1st when everybody's still buzzing from the fest. There's also going to be an open mic afterwards so people can share. But yeah, I would wait a month. And sometimes it takes longer, like the mail to Canada and from Canada has been taking a long time since who screwed up the USPS in the last 4 years. And so getting it, and there are some international participants. We wish there were a lot more. I have the breakdown of, I think there are 13 different countries represented this year in the Poetry Postcard Fest. So good idea to wait a little longer, but I think waiting a month is a good idea. A month after you've sent them.
Like, doesn't get a spoiler, right? They get to receive it fresh.
That'd be a shitty thing if somebody whose poem I read here today heard about it here first and then got it in the mail. That would be kind of anticlimactic, so yes, I would say hang on to it. And the other thing is when you give your poems time, you can see if they haven't, your favorite poem that you wrote is the last one you wrote. It's like, oh my God, this is so great. And then a month later, kind of the shine wears off. I will often put in my journal, this year's journal, I will write, and I did 2 postcard poems yesterday and put them in because I've transcribed them. And then a year later, I reread last year's journal entry and I'll look at the poems and I'm like, that wasn't so good. And that one, I should put that on canvas and keep it here somewhere. So yeah, I think giving your poems time helps you get a better beat on whether they're any good or not.
So Julie, do you feel like your question was answered?
No. Ask again, Julie.
What my question was with regard to the art, because I see everybody posting the pictures on Facebook of the poems that they've received, the postcards. Yeah. We can post the art, but just not the poems, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. That's what I thought, but I just kind of wondered the way this conversation was going. I wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying, Julie. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So I think that was all of the questions we got, and we're about at the hour. So if anybody has, if I missed one, please say in the chat, or if you have an extra question.
I think Cheryl's question, it says, so you are saying that we should not publish the poem in the future? I think your own poems you can publish. Don't publish anyone else's poem that you've received without their specific permission. But your own poems you can publish, of course.
Cheryl, was that the question that you were talking about when you said question in the chat?
No. Please unmute.
Go for it.
Okay, so yes to the question, you answered that. I was thinking about publishing my own work, if that was okay. Okay, so very good. No, I would not publish anyone else's.
Yeah, no, your own work is your own work. And, at the end of the month, you've got 31 poems to send out. There's got to be 4 or 5 good ones. I think that's a great ratio too. If you get 5 good ones out of 31, especially when they're spontaneous like this, that's of course that's fair game. And I'd love to, in fact, Rattle Magazine published a whole edition last year of postcard poems, and it was beautiful. So I would recommend that. It was Rattle from summer 2020. Rattle number 68 is their postcard fest. And of course, the 56 days of August, which we alluded to earlier, and I'll show the cover again. 56 days of August.
I do have another question.
Question, Cheryl.
Yes. Do we send them in the order of the list so that the first person on the list gets all of theirs first, or how does that work? Should I go just the way they are?
Mhm. The way it says on the instructions, on the guidelines, is look for your name and start writing to the person below you. Um, that's the way that we designed it. Not everybody goes that way, but that's the way I like to do it. Of course, I'm number one on the first list, so I start sending to 2, and then go 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I get to 31, and I'm done. But if I were, actually, some years I haven't been number one, I've been number 8. So I start with number 9, do 9, 10, 11, all the way to 31. Then I go to the top of the page and I get the rest of the folks, and then a few bonus cards.
And then the reason for that is so that everybody's getting things throughout the month, right?
Yeah, the idea is to share the love, to make sure that people are getting a consistent flow. I mean, you know, the way the USPS has been the last year or so, it's kind of erratic. So last year especially, there were some issues. People weren't getting them, or they were sending them, and some were taking 2 weeks, and some were getting there in 3 days. So there have been some problems with the USPS. You know, it's another beautiful thing to support the commons. I mean, something that we all are a part of. The USPS is part of the commons, and the attacks on the commons will not stop. So we have to support it in any way we can, which is part of why I'm not afraid to put a letter stamp on a postcard. And get the USPS gets a little extra dough. More power to them. They've had hard work, and you know, they are essential workers. So it's not just dogs they have to worry about. It's people who don't want to get vaccinated. No.
And I also see in the chat, people who have some experience are saying they send the postcards to people in other countries first because it takes longer for them to arrive.
Yeah, that we say that in the guidelines somewhere. It's a good idea to try and take care of those folks. Yes, Ghana. Ghana was a person who said, "I'll go if somebody covers my registration fee," and someone did. There are people who step up and say, "I'll pay for people who can't afford it," and sometimes we'll provide cards too. If people say, "I can't even provide cards," we'll send them. Some people have sent them cards, and one time somebody had some real devastating losses in her life. A couple of important people died, and so I told everybody else on the list, "Hey, how about sending her an extra card if you want to send a bonus card?" And I think she got about 90 cards or so, and she was just blown away, which is part of what a community does. I always tell people, thanks for being part of this community, and that's what we're trying to create, a supportive community that is not so much about judgment, but about creativity and about sharing and about about sharing the details of our lives.
That's beautiful. I think that's a good wrap up. And also Stanley says the biggest thing is to have fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely have fun. I think we haven't scheduled the open mic, but it's probably going to be the first Saturday in September. And it'll be via Zoom like it was last year. And that'll go out. We'll announce that as soon as we get it scheduled. There were a couple of people who signed up today. I didn't have the heart to tell them, no, it's closed, go away. So I'm going to put them on a group and ask that group to do a couple of extras this year. And then once I get that taken care of and the lists are over for the year, then I'm going to break it down and do a post about how many countries we have, what states are most represented, and all that kind of stuff, which I love to do every year. 13 different countries.
What should people do in order to be notified when the open mic will be so that they can make sure to?
Popo.cards is the main website for the Postcard Fest. This is the last year of that website. We're going to retire the site and bring all this content into our main organization site. And there's going to be some news about that on September 1st. So currently popo.cards, you can sign up to be on that list, that email list. And it's usually once a week from that list where a thing goes out. If you go to that, you'll see many different beautiful posts about different postcard methods, about postcarders sharing their work and different postcard or poetry related news. And that's where I'll be doing the post. It generally goes out, I believe, Saturday mornings.
And we are officially done. So if people need to go, thank you so much for coming and for staying the 5 extra minutes.
Keiko, thanks for your excellent facilitation of this. Really beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Paul. It was a joy to spend an hour with everybody.